They say that some secrets were not created to be discovered, but to test the courage of those who dare to seek them. For centuries, scholars, alchemists, and priests have tried to understand what they called the invisible structure of abundance, a set of ancient laws that, when understood, granted the initiate not only material wealth, but prosperity that spanned generations. This knowledge, however, has disappeared or has been hidden. Some manuscripts speak of a map, drawn thousands of years ago, long before civilizations as we know them. A map that led not to a buried treasure of gold, but to something much more valuable, the understanding the energy that creates gold. Most known copies were destroyed by royal order, burned by kings fearful that the people would discover the true origin of their wealth. Others disappeared into underground libraries, where only a few had access. But recently, fragments of that map have begun to emerge in forgotten temples, encrypted letters, and symbols engraved on ancient metals. As I studied these fragments, I noticed something disturbing. All civilizations that thrived for centuries from Babylon to Egypt, from India to Greece knew and applied parts of this same map. They spoke of the same 7 keys, the same energy cycles, and even the same symbols hidden in coins, temples, and works of art. None of this seemed like a coincidence. And the more I investigated, the more evident it became that eternal wealth was not a gift from the gods, but a forgotten science. A science that shaped empires and was erased from human memory when power changed hands. Today, I'm going to tell you what I discovered. But I'll warn you now, the map is not physical. It is a code, a system that connects mind, matter, and destiny. And each part of this map reveals a principle that modern civilizations have replaced with fleeting illusions. The first fragment, the origin of invisible gold. When I began following the clues left in the Sumerian manuscripts, one word kept appearing again and again, shar, which can be translated as that which flows like the sun. At first, I thought he was referring to physical gold, the metal that fascinated kings and built empires. But the more I read, the more I realize the ancients spoke of another kind of gold. Invisible gold, made of energy, intention, and inner order. In the temples of ancient Babylon, priests believed that true wealth was not something that was accumulated but something fattened in. They claimed that the universe worked like a cosmic harp and that human beings were one of its strings. When they vibrated at the correct frequency through thought, word, and deed, they attracted to themselves everything that represented prosperity. And this is where the first fragment of the map is. He talks about in tune with the mind. A state in which man stopped seeking wealth and began to manifest it naturally, because his inner vibration was aligned with the universal order. The ancients called this Zaru resonance, the first key to eternal wealth. This idea, lost over time, is perhaps the greatest secret ever hidden from humanity, the notion that abundance is a reflection of consciousness, not a material achievement. Many kings tried to possess the map to control the world's gold, but the priests hid it because they knew that no empire survives when conscience is corrupted. They left disguised symbols: an H-rayed sun, the serpent biting its own tail, the triangle within the circle. All pointed to the same message: the source of wealth is within. Today, this truth seems mystical, but in those times it was pure science. They observed the flow of rivers, the cycle of crops, and the movements of the stars, and saw in them proof that everything that exists is born of invisible order. The first fragment of the map does not teach us how to earn more, but how to vibrate differently. And this was the principle that made cities flourish in the middle of the desert. But what the priests discovered next changed everything. They realized that the mind alone could not sustain abundance. Something more was needed, something even kings feared: the vital energy pact. The second fragment, the pact of life energy. In the ruins of Eridu, one of the oldest cities in Mesopotamia, I found inscriptions that spoke of a forgotten ritual, the vital energy pact. It was described as an agreement between man and the universe, a silent exchange, made not with words, but with gestures and intentions. According to the scribes, every human being was born with a spark of creative power, and this spark needed to be fed so that abundance could flow. The ancients believed that nothing was free. All wealth, visible or invisible, required equivalent energy supply. But these were not physical sacrifices or blood offerings, they were awareness, focus, and presence. They said that gold is not given, it is answered. In other words, the universe responds to the energy we emit with the same intensity and form. This was the second key to the map, the law of vital exchange. The priests taught that before attempting to multiply what they possessed, initiates should ask themselves, what am I offering in exchange for what I ask? Not in a moral sense, but in an energetic sense. Because they believed that wealth was only sustained when there was balance between giving and receiving. This wisdom has crossed civilizations, disguised under different names. In Egypt, they called her Mate, the goddess of cosmic harmony. In India, it was the prana, the vital flow that moves all things. And in ancient Greece, philosophers spoke of Ether, the invisible substance that connected everything. In all cases, the principle was the same. No empire prospers when it consumes more energy than it gives back. Over time, this pact was forgotten. Man began to desire without offering, to demand without understanding, and the flow of abundance became unbalanced. That's when the wise men decided to hide the map. They feared that without purity of intention, humanity would use this power to dominate rather than create. But there is something curious in the texts. Before they disappeared, the guardians of the map left a prophecy. They said that when humanity came to understand the value of energy again, not money, but living energy, the map would reveal itself again. And maybe ... that's what's happening now. The second fragment teaches that nothing can be taken by force. Prosperity is energy alliance, and only flourishes when there is reciprocity. But the third fragment takes this idea even further. It speaks, Opho, the ancients created the flow of abundance through time, using something we now call fate. The third fragment, time is treasure. Among the scrolls discovered in Nippur, I found a passage that was long considered indecipherable. She said, he who wastes time steals the gold of destiny itself. It was then that I realized what the ancients really meant. For them, time was the purest form of wealth. In ancient civilizations, time was not counted, it was cultivated. The days were seen as seeds, and each act, word, or decision was a form of energetic planting. When a person wasted their time, they weren't just being unproductive, they were tearing up the soil of one's own prosperity. The third map fragment revealed that time was the real treasure because he carried the only currency that could never be counterfeited, human attention. The priest said that where our attention is, there is our creative power. And that the secret to eternal wealth was investing time in things that expanded life, not in things that drained it. They had a curious expression, gold follows the gaze of man. It meant that energy and therefore wealth moved to where consciousness was fixed. A merchant who devoted his time to improving his craft prospered. A peasant who sowed with intention and presence reaped in abundance. But he who lived distracted, driven only by desire or haste, saw everything slip through his fingers like sand. The map showed a circular line, similar to a clock with no numbers. Around it, 7 symbols: the sun, the moon, the wheat, the river, the flame, the eye, and the mirror. These were the markers of Thul's cycle, indicating that all abundance is born, grows, decays, and is reborn, just like time. The wise men said that whoever understood this cycle would never be in need, because they would know when to act and when to wait. And perhaps this is one of the biggest secrets we have forgotten. Today, the world moves too fast, and time has become the first victim of scarcity. But the ancients knew that haste is the modern form of poverty. The third fragment of the map teaches us to honor time as a sacred ally and not as an enemy. Because when time is respected, it transforms and begins to work in our favor. But the next fragment reveals something even more intriguing, how the ancients used symbols to reprogram the collective unconscious and attract prosperity like a magnetic field. The fourth fragment, the symbols of hidden prosperity in the temples of Thebes, among hieroglyphics worn by time. There are symbols that repeat themselves like an ancient song: the sun within the triangle, the serpent that renews itself, the all-seeing eye. For centuries, it was believed that these images were merely decorative, but there is something more. They are fragments of a silent language, the language of energy. The fourth map fragment described these symbols as activation keys. According to the ancients, each geometric shape vibrated at a specific frequency, capable of tuning the human mind to the subtle fields of prosperity. It wasn't superstition, it was spiritual technology. The priests taught that the symbol was the bridge between the invisible and the tangible, a form of remember the unconscious of what the body has forgotten. Therefore, each temple, coin, and royal seal were a unique combination of figures. The circle represented the flow of abundance. The triangle, the creative triad, thought, word, and action. And the eye, the awakened consciousness, the observer that shapes reality. When joined together, these symbols formed what the texts called Seal of Eternal Wealth, a visual code capable of aligning the mind with universal harmony. Initiates use these seals in their daily practices, engraving them on metals, fabrics, or stones. But the secret was not in the object itself, but in the meaning that was deposited in it. The power of the symbol was proportional to the faith, intention, and energy with which it was created. In other words, it was not the gold that gave power to the seal, it was the seal that taught man how to generate gold. Over time, this wisdom was corrupted. Symbols of power became coats of arms of dominance, and the language of abundance was transformed into a tool of control. But in some traditions, especially the Hermetic schools of the Mediterranean, the ancient science survived, hidden under oaths of silence. The fourth fragment reveals something powerful. Wealth is not attracted by effort, but by symbolic coherence. Everything in our lives is a symbol: the house we live in, the words we use, the images we hold. And when these symbols align with the energy of creation, the universe responds. But there was something that even symbols could not guarantee. The ancients discovered that without purity of intention, all prosperity turned into a curse. And this is what the fifth fragment reveals: the law of pure intention, the principle that separated the true creators from the manipulators. The fifth fragment, the law of pure intention, in a manuscript preserved in the Saqqara Desert. I found a passage written in gold ink: only the pure heart can hold eternal gold. For centuries, this phrase was interpreted symbolically until I realized it described the fifth key to the map, the law of pure intention. For the ancients, the power to create abundance was sacred, and therefore could not be driven by selfish desire. They believed that the energy of wealth amplified everything it touched. If a man's heart was in harmony, it multiplied life. But if there was greed, fear, or envy, it turned into destruction. The priests called this force golden light, an energetic current that ran through the body and mind, connecting the human being to the universal source. This light reacted to the emotional state of whoever invoked it. When the intention was sincere, it flowed like the Nile River after the flood, nourishing everything around. But when it was manipulated for personal gain, it dried up, leaving man empty, surrounded by purposeless possessions. That was the hardest lesson of all. Because it meant that true wealth could not be obtained at the expense of another living being, nor fueled by the scarcity of others. Real abundance, they said, was a state of harmony, and anything born of imbalance was doomed to collapse. Records show that many kings tried to use the map to dominate kingdoms. They built temples, accumulated treasures, but they all fell to the same fate: ruin. Meanwhile, the few initiates who kept their intentions pure, priests, healers, artisans, thrived quietly, leaving legacies that span the ages. They understood a forgotten principle: wealth only remains where there is truth. And the truth, for them, was not moral, but vibrational. The human heart, in its highest state, was the only vault capable of holding eternal gold. On the map, this fragment was represented by a flame within a chalice, the fire of will, contained by the purity of intention. A reminder that power without conscience is destruction. And that prosperity is, above all, a reflection of the soul. But there was yet another secret hidden in the margins of this fragment. The ancients believed that when the intention was pure, the human word acquired creative power. And that brings us to the sixth fragment, the golden word, the art of commanding matter with the vibration of speech. The sixth fragment, the golden word. In an underground chamber in the Valley of the Kings, there were inscriptions so precise they appeared to have been engraved with light. In the center, a phrase in hieroglyphics that, when translated, said, "He who masters the word, shapes the gold of tomorrow." This was the sixth fragment of the map, what the ancients called the golden word. They believed that human word was a creative force, and that each sound emitted reverberated in the invisible planes, shaping the reality around it. In other words, the universe did not respond to wishes, but to linguistic vibrations. The priests of the Temple of Ptah, the creator god, performed rituals in which they chanted specific word sounds that mimic the pulse of creation itself. They knew that every language has an energetic signature, and that the man's speech is an echo of divine power. They said that when man speaks with clarity, intention, and emotion aligned, the universe reorganizes itself to obey him. This idea may sound mystical, but there is something deeply logical about it. Words shape thoughts, thoughts shape emotions, and emotions shape decisions. Therefore, the verb is the first brick of reality. Ancient texts explain that the secret was not in repeating magic phrases, but in speak only what you want to create. Every word spoken in doubt or fear was considered a light curse, a crack in the structure of the inner gold. Therefore, the initiates trained in silence. They spoke little, but when they did, each sound was a seed planted in eternity. The sixth fragment taught three principles. Every word is an energetic command. Tone is more powerful than content. The pure verb comes from an aligned heart. This triad formed what they calibrate in resonance, the point at which voice, intention, and emotion vibrated as a single force. Records show that on the holiest days, priests and priestesses chanted the names of gold, wheat, and the sun, believing that by naming them reverently, attracted the essence of these elements into themselves. It was the word becoming matter, and so, they understood something that we still forget today: prosperity begins with speech. The verb is the bridge between the invisible and the tangible. But the seventh fragment would reveal the next step: how to transform this power into permanence, creating wealth that does not disappear over time, but renews itself like an infinite cycle. The seventh fragment, the cycle of golden renewal. In the papyri of the Temple of Heliopolis, I found a circular diagram with symbols that spiraled, like a sun opening. In the center, an inscription read, "Nothing that is held back survives, everything that flows is reborn." This was the seventh fragment, the golden renewal cycle, the secret that explained why some empires lasted for centuries while others disappeared in a generation. The ancients understood something that modernity has forgotten: wealth is not an accumulation, but a flow. They believed that prosperity followed the same laws of nature. It was born, grew, died, and came back to life, in a continuous cycle of expansion and contraction. To keep this cycle active, it was necessary that the energy circulate, allowing gold, food, and knowledge to nourish the whole again. Therefore, in ancient civilizations, donating was not a moral gesture, but a strategic act. They knew that what is given consciously returns multiplied. They called this principle breath of gold, the alternation between inhaling receiving and exhaling offering. When one simply hoarded, the flow stopped, and the gold, which is living energy, began to die within the hands that held it. The seventh fragment showed that every form of scarcity is actually a blockage in the flow, and that abundance only remains where there is movement and purpose. Egyptian temples had chambers dedicated to this practice. In them, priests meditated on the act of giving, visualizing energy leaving them and returning purified. That was how they kept the spiritual gold shining, the gold that never rusted. The sages called this state golden renewal, the point where man and the universe breathed together. They claimed that every empire that understood this law prospered, and everyone that tried to break it fell into ruin. Because true wealth, they said, doesn't belong to anyone. She just passes through those who learn it to keep it moving. And this movement, on the map, was represented by a golden serpent biting its own tail, an eternal symbol of rebirth. But there was still a deeper fragment, perhaps the most dangerous of all, the one that spoke about the memory of the soul and the spiritual inheritance of prosperity. The eighth fragment, the memory of the soul. Among the texts found in the caves near Luxor, was a scroll written in a language that mixed Egyptian and Sanskrit symbols. At the top, a golden seal bore the inscription, "What a man forgets, his soul remembers." It was the eighth fragment of the map, the one that dealt with spiritual memory of wealth. The ancients believed that each soul, throughout its reincarnations, carried with it the records of the universal laws it had learned. And that true prosperity was not just the result of work or luck, but unconscious memory of how to align with the energy of creation. That's why they said that some people were born with the golden breath, a natural gift to attract abundance, not because they were blessed, but because they remembered what others had forgotten. This idea was repeated in several cultures. The Babylonians called it penis, the divine memory. The Greeks called it mnemosyne, the goddess who guarded the wisdom of the gods and granted it to poets and visionaries. And in Egypt, this memory was seen as an invisible river that connected the prosperous souls of all ages. They believed that whoever accessed this current would awaken forgotten gifts, heightened intuition, creativity, courage, and magnetism. This was the eighth key to eternal wealth, reconnecting with soul memory. The priests taught that this remembrance could be activated through symbols, sounds, and silent practices. Whoever listens to the echo of their own spirit, they said, finds the way back to the gold within. But there was a warning engraved at the end of the text: he who awakens memory also awakens responsibility. Because remembering who you are brings back not only the power, but also the consequences of how it will be used. The ancients believed that when an individual remembered his true purpose, he attracted the prosperity that served that purpose and nothing beyond. Abundance, then, ceased to be a desire and became a target instrument. The map showed this stage as a golden spiral within the human heart, the point where the soul reconnects with its origin and remembers why it is here. But there was one last fragment, the most enigmatic and the most dangerous of all. The ninth and final seal, engraved in gold and kept under oath of silence, spoke of the final unity between man and the universe itself, the awakening of creative consciousness. The ninth fragment, the awakening of the Creator in the deepest chambers of forgotten temples, I found inscriptions that were not just symbols, but coded energy patterns. In the center, a simple and enigmatic phrase: eternal gold is born where man awakens as a creator. This ninth fragment of the map was the culmination of all that the ancients had hidden. He did not speak of coins, metals, or territories. I was talking about human capacity to generate reality, of aligning intention, time, symbol, energy, and memory into a single creative force. The priests called this state golden unit. In practice, it meant that the man who understood all the previous keys: inner resonance, energy pact, sacred time, symbols, pure intention, golden word, and soul memory, reached the position of co-creator of the universe. No longer separate, but participating in the invisible order that generates wealth, life, and destiny. Records indicate that those who reach this stage experience something that today we might call integral abundance, not just material prosperity, but clarity, personal magnetism, inner peace, and harmony with everyone around. It was the gold that was never lost, because it did not depend on possession, but on balance and alignment with creation. The map showed that the true treasure was within us, waiting to be awakened. Each previous fragment functioned as a step. But only those who climbed them all could activate the ultimate energy, the force that transforms intention into tangible reality. In the text, there was a final warning: he who attempts this awakening without understanding the previous steps does not create gold. He creates chaos, and that is exactly why the map remained forgotten for millennia. Because eternal wealth, as they said, is not for everyone. It is for those willing to go through time, silence, and the discipline of their own conscience. As I understood the ninth fragment, I realized something crucial: there are no external maps capable of teaching what only consciousness can reveal. The treasure was always here, inside every human being. And what ancient civilizations did was simply give us clues, symbols, and practices to remind us of our own creative capacity. And now, as all this is revealed, the final stage of the journey approaches. It's time to understand how to apply this knowledge today, transform discovery into practice, and allow eternal wealth to manifest in our modern lives. After traversing centuries of hidden wisdom, exploring temples, ruins, and ancient manuscripts, I realized something extraordinary: the map of eternal wealth was never a physical object. It's not a scroll, a coin, or a lost artifact. It's a code within human consciousness itself, a guide that teaches us how to tune intention, energy, time, and symbols to the frequency of creation. Every fragment we reveal, every ancient secret we unravel, shows that prosperity is not the result of chance, power, or luck. It is born from harmony between mind, heart, and action, the ability to respect the cycles of life, and the courage to become a true co-creator. And here's the most crucial point: this map is not restricted to kings, priests, or sages of past ages. It remains available to anyone willing to learn to listen to their own energy, recognize their patterns, act with pure intention, and keep the flow of abundance moving. For eternal gold is not possessed, it is manifested. Now, it's up to you to decide. Will you continue living as someone who seeks outside what already exists within, or will you start talking your own ability to create wealth? Every choice you make, every word you speak, every moment you dedicate to what really matters is a step in building this map within you. If you felt this journey, if something inside you was illuminated by these revelations, don't let the knowledge be lost. Share this video, comment below which excerpt resonated with you most, and subscribe to continue exploring these ancient secrets that can transform your life. The map is here, the treasure is within you. And true wealth, the kind that spans generations and transcends time, is just waiting for you to awaken to it.